So the other thing I would mention, and this is a bit new for us, is that today's session is being sponsored. Now, it's not being sponsored for money, unfortunately. We will eventually get to that, but it is being sponsored in the form of cross-platform promotion. And to that end, I just want to mention that Broker Pocket, which is run by a friend of mine, is in fact helping to sponsor today's little talk. Broker Pocket, just so you know, is a private, as you know, there's no MLS for assignments. Broker Pocket is in fact a MLS effectively for assignments. I would encourage you all to check it out. Broker Pocket, the better place to put up an assignment. There we go. I've now cross-promoted. I hope I sound like all the podcasts that you enjoy every single day. I see that Elaine is here. I'm going to turn the attention for 1 minute to Elaine so she can introduce herself. Elaine is representing the landlord-tenant group, and I know that this has taken a bit longer than normal to get cracking, but after Elaine speaks, I will get right into assignments, which is the reason you're here. Elaine, please feel free to take it away, introduce yourself, and give a 2-minute spiel on the new group, because we'd like everyone to join.
Okay, first of all, I'm in the car. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfectly fine.
Good. Okay. Hello, everybody. Lovely to meet you. Mark, thank you so much for the introduction. And also, Mark, thank you and the rest of the team for putting this together and helping to create the landlord-tenant group. So the group is really for realtors who are stuck on landlord and tenant board issues or RTA issues. And it is hosted by myself and a group of amazing paralegals who have a combined experience of over 100 years. So we're bringing you over 100 years worth of experience to answering your questions. The couple of caveats: we can't look at file-specific questions because we have all sorts of issues with the Law Society if we do that. So we're happy to do generalized stuff. We're happy to consult with you if you need it. There is presently a list which will be added to of people that we know and trust will give you the right and correct information. And I'm looking forward to an absolutely engaging experience with everybody, and hopefully educational and maybe a little bit of fun too. So that's my blurb, Mark. Thank you.
Great. So guys, please join the group. And without further ado, let's turn our attention to assignments. And thank you very much, Elaine, for that. I will admit to you that what I'm doing right now while I pause in this sentence is I'm downloading a Form 150 just because I want to have it up as I speak. I'm not going to be going through a formal talk today. Instead, I know what I want to hit. And I know how I want to make this a bit of an advanced sort of talk. So just bear with me for 1 second while I obtain the Form 150, which I'm getting right now. And I'm sorry about that. That should have been done beforehand, but it was not. Not my finest moment, but this is where we are. So there we go. 1 second, please. 150, there it is. There we go. Add. Perfect. Assignment, there it is, and I'm going to download it, and we are ready to go. And then I'll share my screen. Where is it? Save as editable PDF. There we go. Thank you, web forms, coming to the rescue again. All right, let me share my screen and let's get cracking. There it is. Okay. Oh, that's not right. I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to use a different ORA form, one that I just downloaded from the internet. I have no idea if it's right or wrong, but I'll use it anyways, just because I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so this is something I downloaded randomly from the internet. I have no idea who posted it. The data is not mine. It doesn't come from my office, so I'm feeling free to just do it because someone put it up online. Okay, let's talk. Let's talk assignments. Guys, first off, let me talk about the assignment market generally, and then we'll talk about ways you can guard yourselves and advanced assignment techniques. First off, the assignment market is largely liquid at the present time. What that means is that whereas before anyone and their dog who had any product in the province of Ontario was seemingly able to go ahead and list their product for sale and quickly find a buyer, what we are discovering and what I'm seeing in my office is that assignments are sitting forever on the market. This is, by the way, causing an interesting facet. This is just a high-level overview before we delve into assignments. This is causing an interesting facet to the market, something that we haven't seen in many years, where the job of a lawyer is not only to help with assignments, but also to help with renegotiating contracts back to the builder, because assignors, that is to say the sellers, upon unsuccessfully being able to assign, had it up for a couple of months and nothing's happening, and the funds are still about to come out for the next deposit, then turn to their lawyers and say, can you get me out of this agreement? And so there's a whole new burgeoning field for lawyers in the form of negotiation with the builders of mutual releases. Certainly that's happening in my office with reckless abandon. And truthfully, it's stemming largely from the idea that assignments are very, very, very hard to procure. Of course, the reasons assignments are hard to procure is because of changing market conditions. Our interest rates are up. People are not certain of where the costs are of these previously assured products. But more importantly, many people were purchasing assignments for the wrong reason. Even though they were claiming they were not, most people were enticed by their uncle or their cousin who went ahead, bought something, put down $100,000, and soon thereafter made $300,000 or $400,000 more money than most people make in a lifetime simply by owning a contract. The people flooded into the assignment market, buying second, tertiary homes, often with fictitious financial information, but more importantly, incorrect financial information at best. What I mean by that is, you had to have a mortgage approval as an example to provide to the builder. Well, you could use that same mortgage approval to purchase 3 or 4 condos, because it's really only talking about the state of your affairs and not taking into account your future obligations. There were all sorts of tricks and shenanigery that took place, but the be all and end all is that there are many more people who actually have contracts to purchase condos than intend to use them. Many of them who purchase are not able to afford these condos, will be in a precarious position if forced to close, and are looking to unload them. And many people are not able to close. So if that's the state of the market, where do we go? By the way, just as a positive note, because that's been pretty depressing to begin, and just before I move away from the high level and turn my attention to the detail, I would mention that though the market is still, the pain is still to come, at least that's my impression, I would tell you that I'm more optimistic about the new build section of the market than I am the resale, because I believe new build has a built-in price floor. There is a cost of construction issue which you cannot get around. But more importantly, there are builders who are taking supply off the market, and supply continues and demand continues in that area. New builds being the most important or most valuable of a given product when compared to their resale cousins. I just have more optimism about that side of the market going forward. Having said that, that doesn't mean we're not in for a world of hurt and people trying to back away from deals. So on to today's session. Why are we talking about this? Why does the macro matter? How does it translate to the basic contract that we routinely sign? Well, the answer to that is that there are a whole range of pitfalls and problems that exist in the way that we have been conducting ourselves in the assignment market routinely as agents, which we have not been able to discover because we've been in an upward market. As an example, as a basic point, if you enter into an assignment agreement and real estate values continue to go up 10% every year, regardless of whether you made a bad purchase, you will do everything in your power to close that as the assignee because you have made money. And thus, no one was really walking away from deals. This is very different than an assignment market where you've assigned your product in January of this year, and suddenly the product that you thought you had purchased and that you did purchase present value for as of January is now marked at September pricing, which is 30% below. You may very well have the requirement to walk away. More importantly, however, builders themselves are facing certain pressures that are causing them to ultimately change around the terms of the contract. And I don't know how many of you saw our post from last night, but finally Addy Developments was slapped on the wrist for what they did. Well, it's really just a slap on the wrist, but some of you will know of builders who have gone ahead and raised prices or not abided by the terms of their contracts. And what happens to an assignment contract then? Well, all of these things are kind of the things we need to know and that we're going to talk about now. So In order to talk about what the pitfalls are of an assignment agreement, it pays for us to examine what a normalized agreement of purchase and sale without anything in the Schedule A says about how payments are made. And to that end, I'm going to turn to this random assignment example that I haven't looked through and that is probably wrong in any number of ways, so ignore whatever is written here. But I'm going to use it for the purposes of the form alone. And let's take a look at what this form says, because I really want to go through, if you do not put anything in Schedule A, what does this agreement say about when payments are made under an assignment? And you'll be surprised at how few realtors actually understand this concept. So the first thing to note is that similar to any other agreement that you have, you'll see that it says that the deposit is going to be $40,000 or whatever it is. There's a deposit line. And all of you being realtors are familiar with that line. You understand that upon acceptance of the agreement, this money is going into a realtor's trust account. So let's use our own numbers. Ignore the numbers that are on this screen. You know what? Just for the sake of clarity, I'm just going to pull up a blank agreement. Sorry, 1 second, guys, just because I don't want to confuse you with someone else's bad work. I haven't looked through that, and I'm sure it's going to be a problem. 1 second, please. Okay, that should do. Okay, I'm just using an actual agreement I have here. I'm just deleting some information. 1 second, please. Sorry. Okay, well, I'm going to do it this way then. Go. There we go. Okay. So the first thing that you note is that in a standard assignment agreement, there is a deposit, and the deposit goes to the real estate brokerage and trust. If you turn our attention to Schedule B, which I'm going to pull up separately because seemingly I've been having some trouble pulling it up, so I'm going to share a screenshot with you right now. If you pay attention to what it says in Schedule B, which is right here, it says the math according to a normalized assignment transaction. And what it says is that the deposits paid by the assignor to the seller under the original agreement of purchase and sale are actually paid at the time of someone's choosing. So the first payment was the deposit paid on acceptance. The second is the repayment of the deposits that the assignor, the seller, had originally given to the builder. Usually, most realtors select upon acceptance of this assignment agreement and upon receipt of consent to assign from the seller. So let's use math from a transaction. Let's say, keeping it simple, that someone had agreed to pay $800,000 to the builder for an assignment, and the assignee has agreed to pay $1 million for that contract. So there's a profit of $200,000 built in. If they gave, and let's say that the original contract had $100,000 paid by the person who had originally agreed to pay $800,000 to the builder. So far, so what is actually owing to the assignor, to the seller, is the profit, $200,000, plus the return of the deposits, the $100,000. Why? Because once this assignment is consummated, once it is done, once the builder has given it its in premier, then the credit of $100,000 that the assignor has paid is transferred over to the assignee. This is a critical component because people who haven't done assignments really do not understand this. They believe that upon an assignment going firm, this kind of makes some sense. The builder immediately returns the $100,000 that was paid to them to the assignor, and the assignee replaces that $100,000. But that's not what happens. Instead, what happens is the builder simply says, yes, you're the new assignee. We are now crediting you with the $100,000 paid. And so the assignee therefore has to pay the assignor that $100,000 that they had originally provided to the builder. So the amount of money that has to go back in toto, in aggregate, is the profit, the $200,000, the difference between the $1 million and the $800,000, and the return of the $100,000 that the assignor had originally given the builder, $300,000 in total. So the question of how that is paid in the normalized agreement is firstly $50,000 pursuant to the normalized deposit that we pointed out on Schedule 1 or page 1 of the agreement. But we still have $250,000 to pay. The second payment, usually in a normalized agreement of purchase and sale, is the return of the deposit, the return of the $100,000 that the assignor has paid the builder. And that is what this says in paragraph 3. It says that the deposits paid to the seller under the original agreement shall be paid as follows. And when should it be paid? Well, usually it's paid upon acceptance of the assignment agreement with the builder. So backing up and explaining this for those people who may be new to this, after an agreement, a Form 150 agreement of purchase and sale is signed between an assignor and an assignee, it is submitted to the builder, and the builder then circulates a three-way agreement, which we're going to talk about shortly. And that three-way agreement basically says, hey, as between all three of us, we agree to this assignment, we're good to go. And it's only once that three-way agreement is signed by the builder, the assignee, and the assignor that the assignment itself becomes firm and binding. And as a result, because it is at that time that it becomes firm and binding, usually, and as a result, that the assignee will be credited with the $100,000, it's usually at that time that realtors engineer the payment back of the $100,000 to the assignor. So where does that leave us at the present time? Under a normal agreement that has been unaltered. So we owe $300,000, the $200,000 profit and the $100,000 return of deposit. In this instance, where I'm giving you fictitious numbers, we put $50,000 down as a deposit, and we've returned the $100,000 upon the builder acceptance. So we've paid $150,000 of $300,000. And if you take a look at the agreement of purchase and sale, you will see a clause which most people ignore, but I'm going to pull up because I do enjoy reading these things for reasons that I really don't quite understand. Drives my wife nuts, but there it is. This is contained in Schedule A. And it says right at the top of Schedule A, there's a blurb right above Schedule A. I'm not showing it to you because my Schedule A seemingly has my client's names on it, but right above Schedule A, there's this blurb. It says the balance of the purchase price under this agreement. So the $150,000 that is still due and owing, that shall be paid prior to final closing. Now, it technically could be any time prior to final closing, but people being people interpret that to be immediately before final closing. So there are effectively 3 payment time periods under the normal agreement of purchase and sale that is unaltered by Schedule A. The first is the deposit paid to the brokerage under the assignment agreement between the assignor and assignee. The second is the return of the deposits paid originally by the assignor to the builder, which is usually paid back by the assignee to the assignor at the time of builder consent, because that is when the assignee itself will be credited with that same amount of money. And the third is the balance due and owing, being the profit or, over and above the deposits that have been previously paid, or better yet, being the profit minus the deposit already been paid. That's the way it normally works. I'm going to pause for a minute. Does everyone understand how a normal assignment agreement constructed under the OREA form and unaltered by Schedule A works? Does anyone have any questions about that before I delve into where the problems in this scenario can be? Anyone at all? No, we're good. Just feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. If not, I'm going to move on.
Mark?
Yes.
Is the upon acceptance on Schedule B subject to the 24-hour rule that we have in a standard APS?
That's interesting. You're talking about payable upon receipt, upon acceptance of the assignment agreement?
Right.
Technically, it doesn't actually have that 24-hour period. Technically, it's payable immediately upon. Practically, I've never seen any lawyer harp on that. What it is as soon as reasonably possible, but no later than 24 hours. That's kind of the way it's practically interpreted. It's a very, very good question. It's actually a mistake in the agreement. It should mention that within 24 hours, but there's a reasonability standard to people's operations. And if you were to sit there and say, it's 1 second past acceptance, you didn't give it to me, this is done, a court wouldn't accept that as acting reasonably and in good faith.
Okay, thank you.
But that's a very, very, very good question. Anything else, guys, before I move on? Okay, fine. So that being the case, now let's turn our attention to the protection given to the monies under the normal system that is paid. So as we're aware, let's keep with our scenario, which we've talked about. So now we have a scenario where $50,000 has been given to a brokerage trust account. No problem. We understand the protections accorded to the brokerage trust account. It's not being released from that brokerage trust account under the normalized agreement of purchase and sale. We're fine. And if the deal torpedoes or if there's a problem, no one has taken that money. Everyone understands that. You're all realtors. You get that concept. Well, what about the second bit of money? What about that $100,000 that we paid back to the assignee, sorry, to the assignor, because the assignor had paid it to the builder? Well, that's protected too, isn't it? Think about this. So when you pay deposit monies to the builder under a Form 150, under the Condo Act, that is protected monies. Those are deposits made pursuant to the Tarion schedule, and they are protected largely. I mean, listen, we can go into the extent of Tarion protection or whatever it is, but there is other protections, and I don't want to go into them now, but basically if you take out more money than what is what Tarion has extended, then there's additional insurance and requirements that, who cares? The point is that by and large, the deposits that you've given to the builder are protected in this world. And as a result, once you become the assignee, let's say the builder goes bust. Let's say that the builder says, hey, the price of this product is going up and you have to actually pay more, or you can get out of the contract. That $100,000 is coming back to you. It is protected through the Tarion process. It is protected through the processes of real estate. So far, your $150,000 that you've put down is protected. Your $100,000 is protected. Under the normalized agreement of purchase and sale, your $150,000, the extra amount, the profit that you're going to pay, is also protected. Why is that protected? Because you're only paying it at the time of final closing. You're only paying it once you know that the transfer is taking off, usually concurrently and at the same time. In fact, there's clauses that are usually built into Schedule A that says you shall complete this part of the contract before completing the contract with the builder. So under the normal unaltered agreement of purchase and sale, all the monies that the assignee is paying to the assignor is protected in one of three ways, either through a brokerage trust account, through the Tarion or trust process at the lawyers, or because you're making payment congruent with taking title in the final instance. And as a result, there's very little risk. Now, there's obviously risk in taking on an assignment, but I'm talking about risk of losing that money. It's interesting because I'm now going to turn to ways people amend this contract. You know, when I first started into law, about 70% of my client base, about 80% of my client base actually, this is before I was doing just conveyance, I was doing some litigation and everything else, corporate work, was Indian or South Asian. And myself, I'm Jewish. I bring this up for reasons. It so happens that within my cultural context, when my surrounding and the people I surround myself with or grew up with formed a contract, they went to their lawyers first, they formed their contract, and then there was a transference of money that took place after everything was signed and dotted, usually at a closing office at a lawyer's office. This was de rigueur. This is what happened. When I got my first clients, particularly from the South Asian communities, I was often presented with the following scenario. I was often presented with, hey, Mark, we want you to draft up the following document, and here it is, very similar to what I was used to. And then I would say, okay, so we're going to have the closing schedule and we'll transfer our $1 million at the office and yada, yada. And they'd say, oh, no, we've already transferred the money. I'd say, what are you talking about? You've already transferred it. This is $1 million. We didn't have a signed contract. They said, oh, no. I shook their hand. I understand. I know who they are. I know who their son is. We're good. They married this person. And I was aghast. I was like, what are you talking about? But the reason I bring this up is someone pulled me aside and said, get out of your bubble. Here's what happens in India. It takes 18 years for the courts to see an actual process through. All we have are handshakes because there is no legal process that we can rely on. There's no functional court system that ultimately will see justice. So if we don't have handshake, we have nothing. And we brought that back with us. That has become part of our cultural experience and our cultural legal milieu, which is very interesting. And the reason you may wonder why I'm bringing this whole story up, it's because there are different cultural components to how monies are paid as part of an assignment. If you go to Markham, where many of our Chinese friends live, cash paid up front is totally normal. In fact, it's very abnormal to see anything close to the OREA agreement being conducted. And so many of you, while I've been speaking about what the normalized agreement of purchase and sale says, have probably been saying to your head, but wait, this isn't the way it was done in my instance. This isn't what happened. I paid all my cash up front. And indeed, if you were dealing in Markham, you probably did. You probably paid all your cash up front because that was the cultural milieu in which these assignments took place. Whereas if you did an assignment in Mississauga or Brampton, you were far less likely to pay the actual balance up front. And so where you practice directly relates to the pressures you are going to be feeling as you kind of negotiate through this. And negotiate through this you must, because we have talked now about the 3 payments. We've talked about when under the normal agreement these are paid. But let's take the Markham example. Let's take the example where all $300,000, where $50,000 is put down, meaning that $250,000 still remains. And that $250,000 pursuant to a clause in Schedule A is called to be paid at the time of builder consent. By the way, this happens all the time. What happens then? Well, the protection of the money stays the same, doesn't it? The $50,000 that you paid in trust, fine. The $100,000 that you returned, fine, assuming this isn't released yet. The $150,000 profit that you just gave, now that's tricky. Because as what we're seeing in today's market, and that's the reason I started with the macro analysis, what we are seeing in today's market is that builders are starting to say, hold up, I need more money from you. So let's use that scenario. Let's use the scenario where a builder has said that. Or, more importantly, you know what just happened to Addy Developments last night or today? They're having their thing revoked. What happens if you're a builder, someone who put down on an Addy's development and assigned it at this point and had paid all your profits up front? Now let's think about this. So our friend in Markham, the assignee, has now paid $300,000. They're going to get back the $100,000. They've been told by the builder that they have to raise their price by $150,000. And they are aghast. And they say, I don't want to raise my price. I want to walk away. And the builder then says, okay, no problem. No problem. We can walk away. So we'll give you back $100,000 on the credit. It's all yours. And then you can possibly sue the assignee, the assignor, although it's very doubtful you can unless you have the right clauses. We're going to talk about that. For the $50,000. But that $150,000 you gave the assignor, assuming it's no longer still in trust, what happens? You are screwed. Now, this was not an issue in an upward rising market, but it is a huge issue today. And if you are not structuring your agreements in line with the normal OREA agreement, namely that the profit is to be paid on final closing, then you are opening up your client, assuming you're acting for the assignee, to momentous risk. And it's risk that you really cannot let them take on unless you properly inform them of that risk. So I'm not saying to you, don't do it. It may very well be that the assignee is getting the deal of a lifetime and wants to do it. Okay. But every one of you has an obligation to say, hey, I'm advising you not to do this for the following reason, because this profit is at risk. And if you don't realize that now, then you are in trouble. And every broker should be ensuring that anyone who ultimately is transferring anything more than the amount that is in the brokerage or the actual deposits paid are properly informed of the risk. Because I guarantee you on Addy Development, someone's coming back after the broker who represented an assignee and said, you let me pay the whole amount and I'm no longer getting this back. Big, big, big problem. Does that make sense so far? I'm going to stop for a second because I have a lot more to say because I do enjoy the sound of my own voice. But does anybody have any questions about what I've talked about? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And if not, I'll move on to the next piece.
Yeah, quick question. So
can you introduce yourself as you speak? Sorry.
My name's Andre. I'm a realtor.
Okay.
So now, okay, you'll get sued. Let's say they'll come sue you for the 150. Is it more that they can claw that 150 back? It'll just take years, or it's like they've technically lost. Like in the end, if they sue, there's a good chance they'll get that profit back.
Right. Well, this brings me to the first clause that I wanted to mention to you. The simple fact is that the normal OREA agreement does not in any way contemplate a builder not abiding or changing the terms of the contract or walking away. And so a good assignment agreement in today's words, and this is actually bringing me into the next point, Andre, thank you for raising it, is one that specifically dictates what happens in these events. So in addition to actually making sure you don't pay that extra 150, there should be a clause in Schedule A that basically says that this agreement is conditional upon, or I don't need to say it's conditional, but you can say the seller represents and warrants that the purchase price shall remain, the assignor shall remain, represents and warrants that the original purchase price as agreed to by the parties shall remain unaltered and that this agreement shall be in good standing on the point of closing, failing which consequence. This is a very smart clause to have in. In fact, I helped draft that first clause. I never used to put that into my assignment agreements, but I started to draft that clause now for people. I say started to, like I've been doing it a lot. I did it once. There haven't been a lot of assignments that crossed my desk recently. But I drafted that clause specifically because we're now trying to account for the reality that we know that's on the ground where builders are pulling this shit. Sorry, there's a lot of people on this. Where builders are pulling this stuff. There we go, much better. And because of that, having a clause that dictates what happens if they do pull that stuff, making sure that the money is still there is important. It is a critical component of Schedule A and protecting yourself and your clients. By the way, the reverse of all of this is true if you're acting for the assignor. If the assignor try to gobble all the money you can, right? You have no liability. You can go ahead and do it, but I'm talking on balance being the assignee and guarding yourself. So does that make sense, Andre? Did I answer your question there?
Yeah. So, but let's say there's probably a whole bunch of agreements now that don't have that clause, right? So let's say that they happen now. You know, what do you say to somebody who bought it? Let's say you have you're representing the buyer. Yep. Builder defaults. Let's say they gave 100,000, let's say profit at builder consent, right? Yep. So what will be the course of action? You will, like, I assume that you will sue the other party for that back if they just
possibly,
say, well,
Andre, possibly. If you'll give me permission because it's a really good question. I would prefer to answer that question. I know what the answer is, but I prefer to answer that question directly once I've gone through the remainder, because some things that I'm going to speak about in the next couple of minutes directly impact the answer I'm going to give you on that question. So I'm going to ask you to hold off on that question and ask it to me at the end.
Okay.
And I will then bring in what I'm going to be saying next into that answer. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So we have these instances where the builder changes. We have these instances as well where the buyer, where the assignee cannot close. Let's start talking about that, because that's a risk in today's market. And that's not a risk particular to the assignee. That's a risk to all buyers. All of you are on this channel. I'm sure you've now all heard stories of people who can no longer close. And if you haven't, by the way, call up Sandra Jackson and she'll just talk your ear off on these things because it's her favorite thing in the world to do. But not closing because of appraised value, not closing because of higher interest rates. This is the order of the day. So what in the world happens in that instance? Let's talk about that liability. Well, the assignor is in some real trouble. Because whereas the assignor in the normal course has given up their rights to the assignee, you'll recall that I described a process of how this assignment works. There is an assignee who enters into a contract with the assignor where the assignee says, I'm going to take over this contract. And the assignor says, I'm going to release myself from this contract and give you everything. Great. That's what the original OREA agreement says. But there's another agreement, one that you don't pay much attention to, because at that point, your job is largely finished. And that's the agreement that I have to pay attention to, that Lauren has to pay attention to. See you there, Lauren. Hi. And all of us lawyers have to deal with the three-way agreement that exists as between the assignor, the assignee, and the builder. What does that assign? And that's an agreement that is subsequent in time. And for those of you who haven't taken first year law contract, agreements that are subsequent in time take precedence over those that were signed before. And what that contract says, again, between the assignor and the assignee, so overriding whatever's in the OREA agreement, but complementing it really. What that says is that the assignor, the seller, remains liable for the contract should the assignment not complete. And as a result, even if you don't include anything about it, even if you include something that says they aren't in the original agreement, the OREA agreement, the assignor can be sued by the builder if the assignee does not come up with the money on closing. And as a result, the assignor remains liable even if they are fully paid out under the agreement of purchase and sale, even if they're doing a marking deal and all profits are been paid in conjunction with the original deposit and the return of deposits, they remain liable if the assignee fails to close the deal. And if that is the case, the assignor should prepare themselves for closing. Now, truthfully, it's not really a very teary-eyed, I've had this happen once, but it's not a very teary-eyed event when the assignor is forced to close, because what that means is that the assignor has received the money from the assignee, which they can use to, cry and take a golden shower in like coins, like Scrooge McDuck style. But also, they then revert back, they get their deposit back, and they can close their deal and resell it. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but the assignor has to be in a position where they are prepared to take it back. They are not relieved from the obligations pursuant to the three-way agreement signed. Does that make sense so far? I'm going to pause.
I have one quick question. I guess if that happens, is there anything, you know how in a resale you have to mitigate your kind of losses and that kind of thing? Is it the same thing with an assignment? Let's say you can't close.
Sure. Yeah, everyone has a duty to mitigate. That's a general concept in law that was hammered out in this case called asamara. And yes, everyone has a duty to mitigate their loss. But having said that, that doesn't change the reality that we've just talked about.
And if the profits are, I know the deposit is like the loss that you accept should it not happen. The profits, I guess, is that considered, what's that considered? Is that something you just, I guess, keep in the same way?
No, the way it would work is there are, with your permission, your questions are all good. Okay. I'm not going to actually address that. It's going to get too convoluted, and there's a lot of, I have a very, call me after and I'll give you your answer. But that's just a damage claim. For now, what you need to understand is the assignor is liable for damages, whatever they may be. They are not off the hook. That's the only principle I want to kind of get at here. Make sense?
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions so far before I move on? No? Okay, fine. Now, let's talk about what realtors do to the normal OREA that drive Mark and Lauren absolutely batty and up a wall, and which they should not do. So under the normal agreement of purchase and sale, I want to revert back to first principle because it's going to speak to the dangers associated with these transactions and one of the things we need to do. But in order to understand the danger, similar to before, we need to revert to first principle. So I have a question for anyone, and you're all welcome to volunteer and answer for a second. When does an agreement of purchase and sale for an assignment conclude? When is it over? Under a normal agreement. When is a contract over? This is a tough question, by the way. I'm not expecting even the lawyers to proffer a response, but I'll give you the answer. A contract is over when all matters have been fulfilled. When everyone on all sides have concluded and done what they promised that they will do, that is when a contract is at an end. Let's talk about the doctrine of merger, an esoteric concept to be sure, but I want to be clear on this. When a contract ends, it merges. Every one of you knows what this is. Remember, all channels and fixtures shall be in good working order on completion of this transaction, and this shall not merge on completion of this transaction. What is that? It means that even though the contract is at an end, we can still sue on this, because if we didn't write that, we wouldn't be able to. The contract would be at an end. Once a contract is at an end, you can't sue on the contractual terms. So when is the contract at an end if nothing else is written in the Schedule OREA? Schedule A OREA. When does it end? Well, it ends when the final payment takes place, doesn't it? And if you haven't altered the OREA agreement at all, the final payment is that $150,000 payable by the assignee to the assignor on final closing. That's when this assignment agreement concludes, because at that point, all things have been done. All monies have been transferred. The assignment agreement, the freeway has been done. The assignor, the title has been transferred. It is concluded. Now, this cold, hard reality is put up against the cold, hard reality that you realtors like money. And it's your love of money that has caused you to say, well, hold on, if it only concludes at the time of final closing, and final closing may very well be in 2 years' time, then I'm going to put a clause into Schedule A that says this closes at this time, right at the time of builder consent. Now, that clause drives Lauren nuts. I don't know if it does, but I'm assuming it does. And the reason it drives him nuts is because how can the contract legally close if there are still payments to be made? How can that happen? It can't happen. It's not logical. It isn't legal to say that a contract has closed if there are still more payments to be made. The reason you're saying it, though, as realtors, is because you want the closure to take place to release your commissions from the trust account. That's the reason you say it. So a well-constructed clause, I'm not talking about in a downward market, just generally, should not say this transaction closes on this date 48 hours after. It doesn't. It doesn't close on that date, even if you're saying it, because there's obligations after the fact. Instead, what you should say is the assignor and assignee agree that all commissions payable on this agreement shall be paid at this time. You haven't said that the agreement closes. Just talk about when the commissions are paid. I'm not trying to begrudge you to get paid earlier. That's fine. But have the right clause in there. Don't say that it's closed on that date. Because I can assure you that now that we're in this crappy market, if the assignee chooses, if the assignor chooses to sue the assignee, one of the things that I would do if I was acting for the assignee and being sued is I would say, look, pursuant to the terms of the agreement is closed. What are you suing me on? You've said it in here that it's closed. You did it to get your commission, but you wrote that it has closed on this date. There is no contract on which to sue. There is no breach. The contract has concluded on that date. I know that sounds like a legally esoteric sort of idea, but does everyone understand what I just got at there? Does that make sense? Yes, someone has their hand up. I just noticed that there's one hand up. Not sure who has their hand up. Okay, well, maybe not. Oh, Kostya, go ahead.
Mark, what happens in a scenario that, let's say, assignee and assignor agree that the transaction will close prior to, let's say, occupancy or prior to final closing? So the deal will conclude by, like, all the parties agree that it will conclude as upon approval of the assignment by the builder. So what is
if you do that, it's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense in law. You've created an impossible situation if there are still payments to be made. Because how in one sense can you say this agreement has concluded? And in another sense, say, but payments are still due and owing, right? If all payments have been made by the time of builder consent, okay, fine, maybe you can do that. But
so no, Mark. What I mean saying this is, let's say there is a balance, a final balance to pay upon receiving approval of the assignment by the builder lawyer, let's say. So that condition is fulfilled. And now let's say the transaction to close within like 5 days, 10 days after that, and the balance of the profit payable to the assignor. So is there like a challenge with this scenario?
There is a challenge to any scenario that calls for a closing date before all monies have been paid. Does that make sense?
You mean money being paid like at a final closing with a builder?
Yes, yes. If there is any money still payable by the assignee to the assignor, if there's any money that is still payable by the assignee to the assignor, closing could not have taken place before that time. Because the contract still is alive. It's still mandating payments. Do you understand what I'm talking about wording, but wording matters in law. What you need to do as realtors is say that commissions are payable, not that the contract has closed. It matters. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions before I move on? I know it's 10:50, but I'm trying to get through it all. Okay, so I would point out to you that, yes, Ramesh, go ahead.
I have a question. So maybe I'm just digressing, but it's a short question. So if a builder is still selling properties for, say, like 1.5 million, and he still has inventory, and then somebody sells on assignment the same property, like a different lot, for 1.7 million, is that legal? Like, can somebody?
Totally legal. There's no issue there.
It is still legal.
It's totally legal. There's no issue there. You haven't raised a single legal issue in that question.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about the clause that you're now going to put in, which is proper. You're going to say, thank you very much. Commissions are being released. Okay. Commissions are being released. Well, at that point, that becomes a black box, unless your clause basically says, and all parties shall indemnify the realtors in the event that the brokerage payment, in the event that this assignment agreement does not conclude on its terms. So if the brokerage is taking their money and being permitted to take their money, that is not to say that there may not be a clawback if the provision is not worded correctly. So a properly worded provision, and I'm just doing this on the fly, would read something like this. The assignor and assignee agree and acknowledge that any and all commissions payable under this agreement are payable as of the time of builder consent. Don't copy this, by the way. This isn't for use. This is just, I'm giving you something I would be constructing on the fly. Are payable at the time of builder consent. the parties acknowledge and agree that the brokerage shall be entitled to release said deposits from their trust account, and this shall be the irrevocable authority for so doing, and further agree that they can make no claim on any brokerage should this agreement not consummate for any reason whatsoever in the normal course of events. That is a clause that fully encapsulates all of the aspects. It does not in any way change closing. It talks about the fact that the brokerage can release its funds. It indemnifies the brokerage. It gives them irrevocable authority to release said funds, which is what you need pursuant to REBA, or whatever they're calling it, TRESA, whatever. And it also indemnifies the agents should the agreement not consummate, so that they're not involved or embroiled in litigation thereafter should a deal fail. Okay, we can work on an actual formal clause. There's nothing like this in the industry, but that is a comprehensive clause. Does that all make sense? I'm going to pause for a second. Anyone have any questions? No, you're all amazed, aghast. There you go. Just all recording this for your kids tonight. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so realtor commission payments are a dangerous thing in a falling market where these agreements may fall through, because realtors may be reached back for even if the pay amounts have been paid, doesn't mean that they cannot be clawed back unless it's properly structured as part of the agreement. Okay, so where does that land us? That lands us in a dangerous territory. It is the case that if you want to be smart in today's market, you are not permitting the profits to be paid, period. Because the simple fact is the liabilities are greatly lessened and the chance for lawsuit is greatly lessened. In the event, however, that additional monies are being paid or paid out, including any monies for the realtor, you have to be aware that these monies could, in fact, be subject to challenge should the agreement fail to consummate for reasons stemming either from the builder's change of contract or from the assignee's failure to close. And recall that the assignor is not off scot-free. And in today's market, if the assignee does not conclude, then the assignor is in real trouble. Big, healthy deposits as part of assignment agreements should be the new order of the day, because that is what will preclude assignees from walking away. So actually, we're now approaching 11 o'clock. We have 3 minutes left, and I don't like to go over the hour. So if I can, I'm going to read Lauren's comment, and then I'll ask her to questions. So Mark, I see your point about not having an assignment closing date. So you're suggesting that there not be an assignment closing date at all and just draft a clause saying when funds are payable. Alternatively, what if you did have an assignment closing date and then inserted a notwithstanding clause stating that the profit is payable? That would be acceptable. You could do that, Lauren. The problem is that if you put that there's an assignment closing date and notwithstanding that closing date, there's profit payable. In other words, that payment itself does not merge and exists. That still does not permit the assignee to sue or the assignor to sue on the contract should something go wrong. You are precluding one party's rights at court, at law, by insisting on a closing date, because the defense by the other side is going to be, thank you very much, there's no contract upon which to argue in the first place. It has closed. Sure, there is the payment that still has to come, but it has closed. So you really don't want to have the closing date. You want all the terms and obligations to conclude naturally under its open-ended contract, which is why the OREA contract is designed that way and does not reference a closing date as part and parcel of this process. We put it in at our peril in a falling market. Does that answer your question? Somewhat. Okay, I'll take somewhat. Any other questions for me, guys? What else?
Quick question. Will this be available later on as a recording on YouTube?
Yes, as I mentioned early on, I really enjoy the sound of my own voice, and the more I can share it with others, the better. Yes, it will be posted and on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Anything else, guys? Session 2 to complete this. Hi, Sanchita. Sanchita and I go back. Love Sanchita.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, we listen, there's a lot more to say, prescribed by time, but if people want to hear other things, when I post this online in an hour's time, if you want to write in the comments what it is you'd like me to talk about in addition to this, more than happy to do so. I can think of about 5 things offhand easily. That's about it. So guys, I think we're coming up. We have time for one more question. Who wants to be the last questioner? Last question. Oh, Andre, did I answer your question in the end? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, okay, so here's, I guess, I'll put it in a simpler term, right? I know the answer is always talk to the lawyer, but something falls through, right? You paid profit. Let's say you're selling, right? You represent the seller. Something happens to the builder. They paid, let's say, 100K profit on top of all deposits. Because you're going to get questions, and for the realtor, is like, hey, the builder's not closing. Can we get our 100K back? They're going to be pressing you like, where's the profit? Like, can I get my money back, right? Obviously, I'm going to go like, look, it's to the lawyers, right? And I'm not going to give anything back until I get official word. But what's the process? Is the profit, you just keep it until they figure it out with the lawyers? Or what do I say to the client?
If the transaction had officially closed, then the lawyer is going to advise the assignor to not return it at all. If it says this transaction has closed, this is why I wanted to wait, then the assignor has their money. The transaction is concluded. That the builder is doing this to you is a totally separate issue. If the transaction remains open and you've paid out the profits, well, then you can say, listen, there was impossibility of performance. There was a force majeure. There's a range of different arguments a good lawyer can make to say that the contract itself has been interrupted by a third party, giving rise to the return of deposit. And that would be subject to a court case. But because it hadn't closed, your options would not be precluded from making those arguments. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That makes sense.
And Lauren, that speaks directly to why it is you shouldn't be putting closing.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you all. It's always a pleasure. Let's go make money.